Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. You're listening to our Dungeons and Dragons game. As always, I'm your host, the Dungeon Master, or DM for short. And the prologue to this one is that um, we are in the middle of the um, Temple of Elemental Evil, and there's a spiral staircase in the northwest corner of the dungeon. And so the party takes the stairs down. They were at level one, and now they go down to level two. From there, I mean that's the prologues. Then we get into the plot, and the plot is that they head east to room 239, which is a storeroom. This large chamber was evidently used for storing wood and lumber. Stacks of firewood stand near the entrance, planks and beams at the west end. Just inside are several large, lumpy sacks full of coal. Basically, there's nothing really that important in this room. They move on to room 238, which has a padlocked door. Um, and this room, which they break the door down, it had 30 hit points. It's 20 feet by 20 feet square. There's several large hampers along the south wall. Propped along the other walls and scattered on the floor are 8 shields, a bunch of suits of armor, um, various items, backpacks, lanterns, um, rope, stuff like that, right? Um, so everybody went in there, they loaded up. The third room they went in was room 237, which was a storage chamber. Um, had like food, stuff was in here, like rotting on the floor. Again, nothing really of value. From there, they went to room 245, which was a reception hall, and it's 40 feet by 50 feet. And the noteworthy thing in here was it looked like well, there's like no lights in here, and it looked like a statue of a minotaur. And when you get right up on it, it turns out it's not a statue at all. It's an actual minotaur, and it's just like covered in filth and dirt and stuff that sort of gave it the illusion of stone in the dark. And so it attacks the party and they take it out. And then from there, they go to room 236. And this is the most noteworthy part of the dungeon. Well, of this adventure, I should say. Um, and I tried to get AI to give me a picture of this. I described what was in the module, and the AI wasn't really getting it right. So this was as close as I could get. But the idea is there's this hallway. As they're walking down the hallway, there are cracks and holes and stuff in the stone, in like the ceiling and the tops of the walls and stuff like that, where liquid is coming in. And because of all the moisture, um, and because of how dark it is, you've got like mold here. You've got moss and slime, and just everything is slick and slippery. And it makes a note. Well, it says two really important things in the module. One is that the stone here, the marble is rounded. So imagine kind of like a water slide type effect, right? It says everything is smooth. And it also says that when you start, like where they enter versus where there's, spoiler, there's a drop off into a pit. Basically, they're on a water slide. Where that drop off is actually 4 feet lower than where they start. And so since they're on a slick ramp that is perfect, and the module is explicit and says it is perfectly smooth, there's no place for them to grab onto. Once they start doing the slip and slide thing, they can't stop. And in parentheses, it tells the DM they do not get to roll. They don't get any kind of like a saving throw or a dex check, none of that. So at the end of I'll call it a water slide for lack of a better word, right? Um, it drops into a pool. And just like, everything was slippery leading up to the pool, once you're in the pool, everything is too slippery to get out. And it says the PCs drown between 3 and 6 rounds. So Arthur, we rolled a D6. Arthur drowned in 3 rounds. Max drowned in 6 rounds. The Air Maiden respawns. But those were the 3 that went in there, and so unanimously they all got taken out. So when the Air Maiden respawns, she flies over top of this liquid trap that took out her whole party, and she just sort of mourns them. And so what then became the bulk of that adventure was she goes up those spiral stairs I mentioned earlier, all the way up to where you leave the dungeon. And there's a tower up there that used to have a giant raven on top of it. And at any rate, there were some humans that they had freed. Those guys went up there and they're basically waiting on a party to like escort them through this sort of the treacherous countryside to their homes. They don't want to go alone, and they're waiting on the PCs to kind of beat the dungeons so they can do that. And something I mentioned earlier is the PCs are going every once in a while, they hit like a kitchen or a storeroom full of food that hasn't gone bad. And so they've taken that up there for these human prisoners. They're obviously not going to let them starve or whatever. But at any rate, um, so they start talking about how to try to get people out. And one of the problems was that Max, who has died, and my wife was playing her, and my wife was really upset that she died. And we started talking about how in D&D there's resurrection spells and so on and so forth, right? And they were talking about how they might bring her back, and they were talking about how they thought they needed her body to do that. And even if they couldn't do that, they wanted to be able to lay her to rest, to give her like a proper burial. And the way it describes it is that there's this like slimy, like a well, I don't know how to describe it, like a round swimming pool kind of a thing, a cistern kind of a thing. And there's a drain in the bottom, and there's actually like a magic +2 shield down there by the drain, that's covered in slime and stuff, of course. But if you were to get the slime off, it'd be a nice magic shield. um but so stuff is draining out of there, and they had a whole big discussion about how, what do we do. And Arthur, of course, we've said in previous games, he's an immortal. following the rules of the Wrath of the Immortals box set that TSR put out in the 80s. So he's an immortal, and the idea is he's basically in timeout for a period of time equal to his hit points, and after that's over, he can return to the group. So they were talking about when he comes back, he has to, because his previous mortal form was killed, he has to make a new mortal form to turn into, right? To appear as like an avatar for the earthly plane, basically. And and so they were talking about, maybe he could be like a rock um creature of some sort, and that way he could go in there with like a chain. They were talking about getting some kind of like a winch to set up in the hallway so that he could go in and like wrap the chain around um Max and then try to tow her out. And then they realized that, first of all, because like there's some rope that was in that one room, right? I mentioned earlier. They realized no rope was strong enough to lift Max. She weighs like a ton. Um, Even using chains, they weren't sure, like even if it was wound around this big kind of crank mechanism, which they didn't know where they were going to even get one from. If they had one, they didn't know who would be strong enough to crank it to get her out of the pit. They were talking about basically the couple races that they thought Arthur could turn into. If he went in, then he would be stuck and need rescued. And so they were like, try and figure it out. And that became just the rest of the game, was trying to figure that out. And then another part of that was Excalibur's scabbard is in this slimy pit thing, right? And that's a big deal. They want to get the scabbard back. The Gatling crossbow that was really cool, that was in the last adventure, that's in the pit. So this ended up being a huge problem. Um, and that's kind of been the theme with this dungeon, is the traps are worse than anything else is so far. Um, so that was the epilogue of the game, was just everybody trying to figure out what to do. Um, and they couldn't figure anything out. They didn't know uh how to deal with it. So that's where the game ended. Uh, I don't know if we're going to play tomorrow or not. Um, but sometime soon we're going to pick up where we left off here, and that gives all the players a day or two to just kind of think through the problem and decide what they wanted to do. They did come up with an idea to try to use some kind of like a disintegration spell on the to get rid of all the liquid, to kind of dry up the place. Um, but it's such a, because it's in the hallway leading up to it. It's like such a large area to deal with. And even if you get rid of some of it, there's still more coming in all the time. So so they kind of ruled that one out too. I feel like they had other things they thought of doing, and every idea that anybody had, and like we had, everybody was all kind of brainstorming. Um, there was a problem with every solution. So at any rate, that's where we're going to leave it with this one. Um, Hopefully you found this to be interesting. If so, be sure to hit like, leave us a comment, ring the bell, subscribe, all that jazz, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.